Eleanor Conrad. I'm the Assistant Director of European Studies, and I have the honor of introducing Ilana Weltman. Ilana Weltman has developed and teaches Holocaust Education and Contemporary Anti-Semitism course at the George Washington University, where she also serves as an administrator for the Experiential Jewish Education Master's Program and the graduate degrees in Israel education. She formerly served as the project director of the George Washington University March of the Living Faculty Fellows Pilot Program, a Holocaust education program for university professors. She's currently a Ph.D. student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Department of Curriculum and Instruction with a research focus on Holocaust education. She earned dual master's degrees in education and from Jewish Studies at New York University and as a Jim Joseph Fellow. Weltman has started up several Jewish social entrepreneurial ventures for Holocaust survivors and young Jewish professionals. In Washington, D.C., she founded the 3GDC program, a third-generation Holocaust survivor program, and she serves on the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington's Yom Hashoah Planning Commission and volunteers as well for the local child Holocaust survivor group there. So thank you so much, Ilana, for joining us today, and I'll leave the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. I'm so happy to be here today. I'm going to be presenting with Susan Warsinger. Susan Warsinger was born in Germany in 1929. Susan was a teacher for 27 years and a docent at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum for the permanent exhibition and the newer America and the Holocaust exhibition. She is also a member of the Museum Speakers Bureau. Susan is an active member of the local child survivors group in the greater Washington, D.C. area, which I'm also involved with. And together, Susan and I have really become partners in promoting Holocaust education. Susan and I are going to model pedagogy for Holocaust education. And as an educator, one of the most important things that we can do is establish a rationale for why we are teaching the Holocaust very early on before we plan our curriculum. So Susan, I'm going to ask you just very directly, what is your rationale for teaching the Holocaust? Why is it so important to you?
First of all, I want to say hello, Wisconsin teachers. Hello, everybody. It's nice to be here with you. Well, I volunteer in the education department of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum because during my career, I was a teacher for 27 years, and it gives me great pleasure to teach middle school students and high school students about the Holocaust. People ask me, how can you go there over and over again? And my response is, how can I not go? I experienced some of this horror. I am compelled by my conscience, and I'm honored to join the educational movement this museum represents. While guiding our visitors through the permanent exhibit, I teach them about the crimes against humanity that occurred in Europe between 1933 and 1945. We all must remember what happened, and that we all must ensure that such an inhuman assault as the Holocaust never recurs. I have told my children and my grandchildren, and I trust they will tell my great-grandchildren that they should rejoice in the fact that they are living in a democratic society, and that they should be resolute in making sure that no dictatorship ever usurps their liberties.
Thank you so much, Susan, for sharing your rationale with everybody. We're now going to jump into her presentation, and she will start now.
Okay, I'm here to tell you about what happened to me. I was born in Bad Kreuznach, Germany, and in 1929. So I'm 92 years old, so you don't have to figure out how old I am. Anyway, so this is my dad, and I'm holding my arm around my father's neck, and then my mom, and she's holding my baby brother, and the other person is my other brother, Joe, who has his arm around my mother. Now I'm going to tell you my story from a child's point of view because that's the way I remember it. So in 1933, when Hitler first came into power, we were having a good life. We lived in a nice house, and my father had a linen store, and it was a thriving linen store. But things changed after 1933. My father came home one day and he said he didn't have his store anymore. And I didn't understand it at the time, but now I understand it, that they boycotted his store and he lost all of his business. And then finally the Nazis took over his store. So we had to move. We had a nice house and we had to move from one house to another because it was just too expensive to live in our first house. And things just weren't as good for us economically as they were before. You want to go to the next slide, Ilana? Okay, that's me here. I'm going to go to first grade and I'm extremely happy. And all the children in Germany, when they go to first grade, get this cone. And I bet you're already thinking what is inside the cone. And I bet you're already thinking it must be candy. And you're right if you thought that. The parents of all the children who went to first grade filled it up because they wanted their life in the public school system to be sweet and wonderful. And I understand that they still have this custom today in Germany when kids get to first grade. Well, anyway, I was very happy at first when I first came, but it changed very quickly, because I was extremely unhappy and the kids started to bully me and started to make fun of me. And one of the reasons is the teacher was reading anti-Semitic books to the kids in the classroom. And this is just an example of one. We have this particular book at the museum and it's in one of the exhibits and it says Der Giftpilz and it's written in cursive German and the kids are learning. And take a look. This is a poison, Giftpilz means a poisoned mushroom. And the kids are learning by looking at this picture that a Jew is a mushroom, he's ugly and he's sad and he's a poison mushroom. So, it's like, and the teachers not only read this book to me, but other books also. So the kids decided, and they knew that I was Jewish, and they were terrible to me. So anyway, every night I came home and told my mother that not every night, after school, I came home and I told my mother I didn't want to go to public school anymore. And she said, oh, just stick it out. Things are going to get better. But it was bad. It was really bad. And I cried every time I came home. However, one day I was extremely happy. And the reason for it is that in Germany, there was a law that Jewish children weren't allowed to go to public school anymore. So I didn't have to put up with those children. Anyway, Ilana's showing you a picture that I found in my attic. The parents of all the Jewish children in our town of Bad Kreuznach hired a Jewish teacher, and the one that's writing something on the pad was our teacher, and he taught all of the children from the first grade to the ninth grade in a one-room schoolhouse. And he had to teach all of the subjects, everything, social studies, science, language arts. In this particular scene right here, he was doing language arts and he was trying to put all of the different grades together. And what we were doing, we were putting on a play. And the play was that we had to do, every group had to do a fairy tale, a German fairy tale. And the girl on the right that's holding the basket is me, and my best friend is supposed to be, she's supposed to be my mother, and I'm Little Red Riding Hood. She's telling me not to go through the woods because I have to be careful of the big bad wolf. Anyway, we were very happy because nobody there said any derogatory things to us, and we felt very comfortable in that environment. So this picture that Ilana is showing you now is a picture that we have in the museum of a lady who's in a park, and she seems to be very unhappy. She's sitting on a bench, and the bench says "Nur für Juden," which means only for Jews. And then we have another bench that says only for Aryans. And I don't have a picture of the story that I'm going to tell you right now because we didn't take any pictures at the time, but I want to tell you something that happened to me while I was walking through the park. My mother used, no, not yet, not yet. Thank you, Ilana. Anyway, my mother used to tell me to go to the grocery store and buy some bread. And I was maybe 7 years old. And I felt very important. And she used to put the pfennig in my hand. And she used to tell me to go buy this bread. And I had to cross the street, and I was very capable of doing that. And then I had to walk down the steps and walk through a park to get to the grocery store. So on this particular day, I was walking down the steps, and the gatekeeper of the park saw me, and he started to scream at me. And he told me I was a dirty little Jew and called me all kinds of horrible names. And he told me never to come through the park again. So I came home and I told my mother. And so my mother told me, well, next time you go, you just walk all the way around the park. So the next time she put the pfennig in my hand, she told me to go buy a bottle of milk. And I crossed the street and I got to the top of the steps, and I knew I was supposed to go all the way down the block to the left and then go all the way down 2 blocks and then around again in order to get to the grocery store. So I stood at the top of the stairs, and I guess you already know what I decided to do. I decided I was very tired, and I didn't want to walk all the way around the park. So I started to walk down the steps. And of course, the gatekeeper came immediately, started to yell at me, but this time he threw rocks at me. But the most horrible part was that he had a daughter who was maybe a couple of years older than I was, and she saw her father throwing these rocks at me and calling me names. So she did the same thing because he was her role model. And so here is this young girl who was learning hatred and anti-Semitism from her father. I never walked through the park again. This is a picture of my brother, Joe, and we're sitting on the steps. That's me and my brother. We're sitting on the steps outside, and we are extremely happy because my mother is going to have the baby, the one that I showed you first, the picture, and she's having the baby in the house, and they didn't want my brother and me in the house. So, and because we were children, but in the meantime, she was not allowed to go to the hospital to have the baby because she was Jewish. You want to go to the next one? Oh, yes. This one here, when I give a tour to which is law enforcement officers and students and visitors. This is an editorial cartoon that we have at the museum, and I think it explains pretty much what was going on in the 1937, 1938. What was going on was, you see the Aryan, the non-Aryan, which of course was Jewish people who were not the super races, sitting in the middle of the swastika. And take a look at the edges of the swastika, and I guess you can see the stop signs. And then the non-Aryan is sitting under a sign, and it says "Go, go." And of course, the Nazis at that particular time hadn't thought about concentration camps. All they wanted to do was get rid of the Jews, and they told the Jews to get out of Germany. But then you see the Evian Conference, and I'm sure you probably learned about the Evian Conference when all the countries of the world got together, and they didn't want to open up their quotas, and only the Dominican Republic would allow many of them to come to there. And so that the stop signs at the end of the swastika are saying, you can't come into our country. So this is what was going on, and this was going on in Germany at that particular time. Anyway, this is a picture that we have in the museum. I don't have any picture of that night, but I'll just tell you my personal story about what happened. My brother Joe and I, we were sleeping in our bedroom, and it was 11 o'clock. And we were really very excited that night because it was going to be our mother's birthday the next day, the 10th of November. And all of a sudden, some bricks and rocks were being thrown through our bedroom window. And my brother, who's younger, but he lifted himself up on the windowsill and he looked out and he said, Susie. That was my name in German. He said, Susie, it is our neighbors that are throwing these bricks and rocks through the window. And he said the civil policeman was standing at the edge of the crowd like this with his arms like that. And he was saying, doing nothing. He was doing nothing to stop these neighbors from throwing the bricks and rocks through the window. So we were very frightened. And we ran across to our parents' bedroom and across the hall. And there, the rocks were being thrown through their window also. And the crib where my baby brother was sleeping, a rock fell on his hand. And but he was all right. And as all five of us were huddling in the corner of the room, we had to decide what to do. The neighbors had picked up a lamppost and they were carrying it on their shoulder. And they took that lamppost and they smashed our front door. And all the glass of the front door was strewn all over the hallway, and it was like beautiful colored glass that was all over. And their objective was to loot some of our furniture or break some of it and then go up to the second floor to the rabbi's apartment and then destroy most of his artifacts there. So my father had to decide what we would do. So we decided to hide up in the attic of the building. We lived on the first floor, the rabbi on the second floor. On the third floor lived a non-Jewish family, and on the fourth floor was an attic. So we washed up there and we hid in the attic. And the rabbi's children were already up in the attic and his wife was there, but the rabbi wasn't there. And I looked out this little window from the attic and I saw that the rabbi was standing on his veranda and that two SS men came and held him by the arms, each one of them by each arm. And then another one came along and cut off his beard. And then I learned that they took him to jail. Well, later on, I found out that they didn't only do this in my apartment, in the rabbi's apartment, but they did it to all the Jewish families that were living in Bad Kreuznach. And I learned that the picture that you see is not a store, but that was in Bad Kreuznach, but there were still some Jewish stores that only sold to Jewish people because nobody else would shop there, that they did that to the Jewish stores that were still open, and that they arrested all the men and put them to jail. And then later on, I found out that this was going on in every city in Germany where there were Jewish people living. And I guess you already know that this was called the Night of the Broken Glass because so much glass was broken, and it was called Kristallnacht. That's my brother and me, and the baby. Just thought you would like to see that. Well, anyway, after Kristallnacht, before Kristallnacht, many Jews were very ambivalent about really wanting to leave. They thought maybe things would blow over in Germany. My father wanted to stay because he thought it would blow over and he would get his store back. But my mother always wanted to go to the United States. However, after Kristallnacht, everybody wanted to get out of Germany. So but you couldn't go. You saw, according the quotas weren't lifted. So my father found a lady who was smuggling children a French lady who was smuggling children into France. And so if you see where the Germany is, where the G is in Germany, that's about near where Bad Kreuznach is. If you go west a little bit, that's where Bad Kreuznach is. So she said that for a lot of money, all the money that my father had left, he gave it to her, and she took us to France. And wait. Okay, can you just wait 1 second? She took us and to Paris. And of course, we left Germany in 1939, and so we lived with an uncle for a short while, but then we went with an organization that found a foster home for us around a little town in Paris. And we stayed there, and we went to school, and we learned how to speak French. But then it was May of 1940, and I guess as you probably remember that you learned in 1940, the Nazis, the German army didn't just, because Hitler wanted to conquer all of Europe. So he had already gone into Czechoslovakia and Austria. So in 1940, they came marching into Paris. And my brother and I were in Paris at the time, and all the people in Paris were really frightened of the Boche. That's what they called the Nazis. And they all wanted to get out. And some of them so on the map, you can see some of them went to Vichy, and some people went west. And there's this famous town a little bit west of Paris. And it's called Versailles, and I'm sure you've heard of it. And so 2 nuns, I think, got a hold of my brother and me, and we went with the nuns, and I don't know what transportation we had. We went with the nuns along with a big amount of people. Some people were on bicycles, some people were in cars, some people went on the train, some people walked, and they got to Versailles. If you take the train, it's about 40 minutes west of Paris. And so we all got to, and I'm sorry, there's not a pic, the Versailles is not on this map, but we got to Versailles, and the mayor of the town didn't know what to do with all of these people that wanted to escape out of Paris, to escape from the Boche, from the German army. And so he decided that he was going to put up in this biggest place in Versailles. And of course, you probably know what it is already, but just in case you can't quite remember, I'm going to tell you. It is the palace in Versailles, the Palace of Versailles. So what he did is we went to that palace, and it was beautiful gardens, and way on the edge of the gardens, they had this big pile of hay, and they gave us these burlap sacks, and we filled up the sacks with the hay, and then we tied it with a string, and we made a mattress. And all of these people needed to have a place to sleep. So we took our mattresses that we had just made, and we went into the palace, and then the biggest room is here. This is the biggest room in the palace. And of course, you've probably heard of it. It's called the Hall of Mirrors. And this is just a picture that somebody took. The tourists weren't in there when we were there, and all those red ropes were not there, and all the chandeliers that are standing on the floor were not there, because evidently the caretakers of the palace must have hidden them in the basement because they didn't want the German army to confiscate them. So if you could see all of these refugees from Paris putting all of their straw mattresses one next to the other, there was a lot of room for us to sleep. And so we were safe for a while. However, not yet. Could you remember? However, we were,
You guys were safe to sleep.
I'm sorry.
You guys were safe to sleep for a little while. Sorry, I interrupted before.
But I'm sorry, Ilana. What did you say?
Oh, you were saying that you guys were safe to sleep.
Yeah, we were safe for a while. However, the Nazis didn't decide to stay just in Paris. Guess what? They came to Versailles. And so we heard them marching in, just like we heard them coming into Paris. And they had this big caravan, and at the front of it was like a car. And out of the car came a high official officer, a German officer. I don't know whether he was a captain or he was a general, but he got out of the car and he spoke only German. He didn't know how to speak any French, and he wanted to speak to the mayor of the town. And so they called the mayor of the town, and the mayor of the town didn't know how to speak any German. And they wanted to talk to each other. And somebody in the palace said, "Oh, there's this little girl in the palace. She knows how to speak German." So of course, I know you know already who they were thinking about. And if you thought me, and you're right, that's exactly what happened. They called me. And of course, I was terribly frightened. And this officer was so tall. He was as tall to me as if you looked up at your ceiling. That's how tall he seemed to me. And I came out and I translated for them. I don't know what they talked about, but I do remember I was very frightened. And I do remember that the officer at the end of the conversation bowed down to me and he said, "Hey, little girl, how come you know how to speak German so well?" So I was really frightened that he would find out that I was this Jewish girl from Germany. So I told him that the French schools were very good and that I learned how to speak German in the French schools. And the officer said, "Thank you." And then he left. So can you show the map again for a second, Ilana, the map of France? Okay, so here we are near Paris, and the white line is the unoccupied zone of France because the Germans took over the northern part. And so everybody wanted to go inside the unoccupied zone because they thought they would be safe. So I don't know how we got to Chateau de Morel in Brou-Vernay, which is right near Vichy. Somebody took us, and in that place was the castle. Can you show them the castle now? Oh, the castle. Next slide. Here. Okay, so that was inside in the map of Vichy, inside in the zone, and there was this old castle where children, all Jewish children that were lost, they ended up in there, in the au secours des enfants took care of us. And there we were living, and we were going to school in the little town of Brou-Vernay. And we were happy, and we got some food and we were okay. But the horrible part is we didn't hear from our parents. We didn't know what had happened to them. And this is almost 2 years now that we haven't heard from them, and we didn't know what had happened. We wrote to them every day because all I ever thought about is get back together with our parents. So one day the directrice of the old castle called me up to her office, and I was really frightened because I didn't know what I had done. So anyway, I went up to the office and she told me, "Susie, we have heard from your parents. They are in the United States, and they are looking for you all over." And so later on, I found out that the Hayas and the Quakers and the Ose all helped my parents, and the State Department here in the United States all helped my parents find us. How they did it, I don't know, but I guess the Germans kept good records and everybody kept good records, and so they found us. And so they sent you a ticket to come to the United States. So I was really very happy. I was very happy to hear that. And so, yes, so here is a tag that they made for us. What we had to do, we had to go, if you look at the map of France for a minute, you go all the way south and you get to Marseille. And we were held up in Marseille for a while because they had all kinds of consulates there and we had to go past, had all kinds of papers, but everything was fine. And what had happened, Eleanor Roosevelt at the time, she wanted to get many of the children out of Europe so that they could come to the United States. And what she had done, she had 50 children were going on to this Portuguese boat leaving from Lisbon. And we got on the boat with that group of 50 kids and every one of us had to wear a tag like that. This tag was like and was shown in one of the exhibits at the museum. But if you went today, it's not there because they, we change our artifacts all the time. Anyway, it says here, my name is Susie Hilsenrath, and I'm going on the Sapa Pinto, and I'm going from Lisbon, and I'm going to go to the United States. And so the tag is a little bit worn out because we had to wear that for 14 days. The ship, the Sapa Pinto that left Lisbon, took 14 days to come to the United States. And look, it took 14 days. And that's me and my brother, Joe. So when the day before the 14 days were up, they told us we should go to the railing to see that we would see the Statue of Liberty. And we were all very excited. And they said, you had to come up and see it, get up there at 6 o'clock in the morning. So all of us were up there way before. And there was this terrible fog. And the fog, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. It was so bad. But when it was exactly 6 o'clock, the fog lifted, and it lifted like a curtain, like when you go to the theater. It lifted right straight up very slowly. And first we saw the bottom of the Statue of Liberty, and then we saw her body, and then we saw the whole statue in all of its splendor. And the children all cried, and we were so happy because we knew that we were coming to a land where there was not going to be any more discrimination, where we were going to see our parents, and we were going to be happy. It's a moment that I cherish now and think about it a lot, and I talk about it to my brother Joe, who's 91 years old, and he lives right now in New York in an apartment, and he overlooks the Statue of Liberty. Anyway, so we got to the port in New York, and all the passengers got off, and then some doctors got on board to check out all the children to make sure they didn't have any infectious diseases. And so all the children passed except my brother. He had a fever and he had a bad rash. And they said, well, he can't come to the United States. And I was telling them, he had eaten a lot of pineapple and he had gotten the rash from the pineapple, but they didn't listen to us. They said, you can't come. So I guess you already know where they sent us. But not yet, not yet. They sent us, are you thinking? Well, if you were thinking of are you thinking?
I'll take a guess for you. How about Ellis Island?
Oh, yes, that is right. That is absolutely right. That's where they sent us. And when we got to Ellis Island, we learned everything there is to know about the United States. My brother got all these creams on his body and his fever went down. But while we were there, we were sitting at these long tables, like you have in the cafeteria in school, and all the children sit at lunchtime in the cafeteria. We sat at long tables like that, and we met people from all over the world. However, what we did is we were sitting next to a sailor, and the sailor was drinking some brown drink and it had bubbles in it. And the sailor offered it to my brother and he said, oh, do you want to try it? And my brother asked me if it was okay. And I said, yes. And so my brother tried it and he said it was very good. And he said, the sailor told him that it was Coca-Cola. And so at that time, that was a big thing in the United States. And then the next thing we learned is on the table, they had this white bread and it was stacked up and it was slices. And we had never seen white bread in our life. And it was beautiful. And it was, you could crush it in your hand and then you could make a little ball out of it and you could eat it. And later on, they told us it was called Wonder Bread. And we had never tasted anything so wonderful. And then the next thing we learned is that children could put a candy in their mouth and it would stay in their mouth all day long. And so we learned that it was chewing gum. And of course, we were ready to come to the United States. We did not know, we were perfectly ready. So anyway, they took us back from Ellis Island, they took us back to the port and my father was there waiting for us and he took us to Washington, D.C., where I lived most of my life. And this is, I guess this is a picture of me again, of what I looked like. So if you want to ask any questions, this is the time to do it.
Okay, I think we'll jump into the presentation about pedagogy and then we'll do questions right after. Thank you so much, Susan.
Okay.
And I'm actually going to be using Susan's presentation as a model for effective pedagogy for Holocaust education. Okay, so it's very important to share the importance of pre-war Jewish life when you are constructing your curriculum. It's important to contextualize. Students need to understand that Europe was the cultural epicenter of Jewish life prior to the Holocaust, and to demonstrate what was obliterated there. It's very important to avoid oversimplification of Jewish communities. There were Eastern Jewish communities and shtetls, there were Western communities. There were Ashkenazic Jews. There were also Sephardic Jews from Greece that were murdered during the Holocaust. So it's really important to really talk about the different breadth of Jewish life. Also to, Susan, she showed pictures of her pre-war life. She showed pictures of her family. She showed pictures of her going to school in Germany. So it's important to translate statistics into people and humanize and personalize the story. And using survivor and witness testimony whenever possible is very important. There is a wonderful resource that I can demonstrate that afterwards, but Echoes and Reflections actually embeds testimony into the lesson plans, and it has handouts for teachers to use, and it's very useful. It's also important to demonstrate the important role that anti-Semitism had and discussing the history of anti-Semitism in Europe. And so Susan did an excellent job of that in her presentation by incorporating a primary source that showed the growth of anti-Semitism in the school system and how it pervaded throughout German life. It's also important to discuss how victims attempted to retain their humanity in the face of dehumanization. So Susan emphasized the school that the Jewish communities built when they were no longer allowed to be in the German schools. So this was a form of resistance, communal resistance. There are other forms of resistance that are important to emphasize to students, such as cultural, spiritual, or even armed resistance among Jewish victims. Okay. And Susan did an excellent job of demonstrating the language and providing context of Kristallnacht and how it didn't just happen in her community, but it happened throughout Europe and throughout Germany, rather, sorry. And so it's important to really use precision of language, define the terms that you will be using throughout your lesson plans. Also, contextualizing history is very important when discussing the history, and Susan provided a political cartoon and discussed the political climate at that time. And lastly, it's important to stress the choiceless choices of victims. What were the choices that they had? A lot of them are very limited. Some people did not have much choice. This helps foster empathy among students. And it's better to really discuss their choices rather than facilitating simulations in the classroom, which is something we want to avoid. And really, delve into their dilemmas. Really discuss what options they had, and talk about the problems with the quotas, and the problems with even non-Jews that would hide people. They would also be murdered. So it's really important to really talk about those things, and also use primary sources. So Susan provided here a picture right from the newspaper. So it's important to use sources from a plethora of areas. Next, age appropriateness. When we're talking about books to be used, it's important to understand that using memoirs, nonfiction is the #1 choice. You can use diaries. Now, Anne Frank diary is not the only diary to use, and actually you should really use a book prior to Anne Frank. If you're only going to use one book, I would suggest using a book that really talks about the scope or the entirety of the Holocaust. It's okay to use the diary of Anne Frank, but to first use maybe Night by Elie Wiesel prior to teaching Anne Frank, so that they can understand the entirety. Students in grade 6 and above really demonstrate the ability to empathize, but also to understand the complexity of Holocaust history. Before 6th grade, they may be able to empathize, but they might not be able to put the history into a historical context, which is problematic. And so it's better to maybe introduce them to books about diversity and the importance of of not being prejudiced and so forth. So that's something to really think about when crafting your lesson plans as well. And I can provide a book list afterwards for that. Great. So Susan and I will be around for questions afterwards. And I can also show you the Echoes and Reflection lesson plans at that point. Thank you so much.